In the depths of human existence, there are moments of moral crisis where neutrality may seem like a safe haven, but for those who choose it, there lies an undeniable truth: neutrality is a hollow defense, a fragile shield that can easily collapse. Dante Alighieri, in his Divine Comedy, vividly described the darkest corners of hell as reserved for those who chose indifference in times of moral peril. The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. For a Christian, this isn't just a literary metaphor, it's a profound spiritual lesson. Our faith calls us to be active participants in the world's struggles, to stand for justice, mercy, and truth, even when doing so is difficult or dangerous. A call to action in our lives, especially when faced with injustice or suffering, resonates strongly with the words of the Apostle James, who wrote, "For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead." James 2 verse 26. Neutrality, or the refusal to act, is not merely a passive state, it is, in fact, a failure of faith. It is a denial of the moral responsibility that God has entrusted to each of us. How often do we see bullying, injustice, or cruelty unfold before us, and yet we do nothing? Studies show that 57% of people who witness bullying choose inaction. This staggering statistic isn't just a societal issue, it reflects a spiritual sickness. By choosing to remain neutral, we fail to live out the commands of Christ, who calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Matthew 22 verse 39. As Christians, we are called to be the hands and feet of Christ in this world. To ignore suffering, to turn a blind eye to pain, is to betray the love that God has shown us. The truth is, neutrality does not go unnoticed in the eyes of God. While the world may allow us to remain silent, He does not. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8 verse 17. Just as karma has a way of making its presence known, God's justice will inevitably reveal the choices we make, including the times we choose to stand idly by. In moments of moral crisis, we are not given the luxury of standing still. Jesus himself showed us the path of action and sacrifice, confronting evil head-on with love, even to the point of death on a cross. His example is not just a call for us to avoid evil, but a mandate to confront it with the power of love and truth. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12 verse 21. Neutrality, then, is not an option for those who follow Christ. To remain indifferent in the face of evil is to deny the very essence of Christian discipleship. As we reflect on these truths, we are reminded that we cannot live our faith in isolation or comfort. We are called to be active witnesses of God's grace, to speak out against injustice, to defend the vulnerable, and to act with courage. Neutrality, in the end, is a denial of God's will. The world may forget, but God will not. His judgment is just, and in His eyes, there is no such thing as true neutrality. In His divine plan, we are all called to action. We are the survivors of the fire, the ones who, through faith, rise above the apathy of the world. Let us stand firm, knowing that even when the world turns a blind eye, God is watching and His reckoning is sure. Number 1. The silent betrayal. The worst pain isn't always what the bullies do to you, it's the silence of the people who could have stopped it. You look around, hoping for someone to say something, to step in, to remind the bully that they're not as powerful as they think. But instead, all you hear is the oppressive silence. The silence that cuts deeper than any words ever could. The people you trusted, the ones who were supposed to have your back, choose to look away. They avert their eyes, pretending they don't see, as if your suffering is too inconvenient for them to acknowledge. Their silence becomes a heavy weight on your shoulders, louder than any insult, sharper than any shove. What makes it so devastating is the sense of betrayal that follows. You expected them to act, to be there for you, to fight back against the injustice. But they don't. And that inaction speaks louder than any words. Bullies act out of insecurity, trying to mask their own weaknesses by targeting someone else. They project their fears and insecurities onto you, believing that bringing you down will somehow lift them up. But the bystanders, they know better. They can see the wrongness of the situation, feel the discomfort in their gut as they witness your pain, and yet they do nothing. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Maybe they're scared of becoming the next target themselves, or maybe they're just too apathetic to care. Either way, their failure to act sends a message loud and clear you're not worth standing up for. But here's the thing karma doesn't forget. Life has a way of balancing the scales, and silence doesn't come without a price. The bystanders might brush off their inaction in the moment, convincing themselves that it wasn't their fight, that stepping in wouldn't have changed anything. But that lie doesn't stick. The guilt remains. It lingers in their minds, haunting them in the quietest moments of their lives. It whispers to them, "You should have done something." And when their own storm comes, they'll finally understand what it feels like to stand alone, while others look the other way. They'll remember the pain they ignored, and the guilt will hit them twice as hard. Because the thing about silence is this: it's never truly empty. It carries the weight of every choice they didn't make, every moment they chose their own comfort over someone else's pain. Karma doesn't forget. It never will. Number 2, the real cowards aren't the bullies. People often focus on the bullies, labeling them as the villains, and rightfully so. Bullies are loud and brash, desperate for attention, seeking control over others because it's the only way they know how to feel powerful. They thrive on fear and humiliation, and their actions are often predictable. You can spot them from a distance, their cruelty written all over their actions. But the real cowards, they're much quieter. They don't shout or demand attention. Instead, they sit on the sidelines, pretending they're not a part of the problem, while their silence feeds the chaos around them. These are the people who witness the bullying, who know exactly what's going on, who hear the insults and see the tears, but still do nothing. What makes them worse than the bullies is that they know better. They're not blinded by anger or insecurity like the bullies are. They have the moral clarity to see that what's happening is wrong, that it's unjust, and that someone should step in. But instead of acting, they convince themselves that it's not their place. Maybe they think staying out of it is safer, that they won't get involved because it's not their fight. They tell themselves that they're neutral, that it's not their responsibility. But let's be clear, that's not neutrality, it's cowardice. By choosing not to act, they've already chosen a side. And that side isn't the one of the victim. Their silence is a choice, and it speaks volumes. It says, "I'd rather protect myself than help someone in pain." It says, "Your suffering isn't my problem." They think they're playing it safe, but in reality, they've sided with the bully. The truth is, inaction is as harmful as aggression. When you choose to do nothing, you're reinforcing the system of harm. And karma, it doesn't take kindly to those who choose the wrong side. One day they'll face their own bully. Maybe it'll come in a different form: a toxic boss, a backstabbing friend, a situation where they desperately need someone to speak up for them. But no one will. That's the price of being a coward. When it's their turn to need a hero, they'll understand what their silence cost someone else. Cowardice always comes back around, and when it does, it doesn't ask for mercy. It demands payment. Number 3, their guilt will speak louder than their words. Guilt is a shadow that follows you, even when you try to ignore it. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand attention, but it lingers quietly, steadily growing heavier with every passing day. For the people who ignored your pain, guilt becomes their invisible punishment. At first, they try to brush it off. They tell themselves that stepping in wouldn't have changed anything, that it wasn't their responsibility. But deep down, they know they're lying to themselves. They remember everything: the look on your face when you were humiliated, the way your voice broke as you tried to speak, the weight of your pain as they stood by and did nothing. They remember all of it. They replay those moments in their minds over and over, looking for ways to justify their inaction. They tell themselves that it wasn't their place to step in, that they would only make things worse, that it was someone else's job to act. But those excuses don't hold up. They know they had the chance to make a difference. They had the opportunity to speak up, to intervene, or at the very least, to show you that someone cared. Instead, they chose the easiest path, silence. And that silence doesn't let them rest. It follows them into the quiet corners of their lives. It finds them in the stillness of the night, when they're lying awake, unable to sleep. It finds them when they hear a similar story, or when they see someone else suffering. It whispers to them, reminding them of their failure. Guilt is like that. It doesn't need to scream, it seeps in slowly, silently, until it becomes a part of them, reshaping their conscience, refusing to let go. The worst part? There's no way to undo it. They can't go back in time and change their actions. The guilt becomes a permanent scar, etched into their hearts, shaping how they view themselves and their own worth. It forces them to confront the truth when it mattered most. They chose their own comfort over someone else's pain. They may never admit it out loud, may never say the words, but the weight of what they didn't do will haunt them forever. Because in the end, karma doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, all it takes is the quiet whisper of guilt, reminding them of the truth they can never escape. They failed when it counted. Number 4, your pain was their test, and they failed. Life has a way of placing people in situations that expose their true nature. Your pain wasn't merely your own, it became a crossroads for everyone around you. The universe set the stage, offering them a chance to show who they truly were, to reveal whether they were capable of compassion, courage, or even just basic decency. This moment was their test. Would they rise above the situation, show empathy, and stand up for what was right? Would they extend a hand to lift you up, even in the darkest of times? Or would they take the easier path, pretending they didn't see the hurt, didn't hear your cries, or didn't care about the suffering that you endured? Sadly, they failed. Miserably. While you were struggling to survive, carrying the heavy weight of your pain, they were being tested in ways they didn't even realize. Each tear that fell from your eyes, every harsh word they cast at you, and every single moment of your suffering was an opportunity for them to demonstrate their humanity. But instead of stepping up, they chose to stand back, uninvolved, disinterested. They could have chosen kindness, could have made the choice to help, but they didn't. They stayed silent. Maybe they justified their inaction by telling themselves it wasn't their fight. Maybe they convinced themselves that someone else would step in and take care of it. Perhaps they thought you were strong enough to handle it on your own. But none of those excuses matter now. The universe doesn't allow failure to slip by unnoticed. Karma, after all, is a strict grader, and their lack of action hasn't gone unmarked. They were tested, and they failed. And now they'll have to face the consequences of their choice. The same way you were tested through hardship, they'll face their own trial. But this time, they won't be able to observe from the sidelines. They will be the ones needing help, searching desperately for someone to show them kindness, someone to stand beside them when they feel alone. And when no one answers their call, when no one comes to their aid, they'll understand only then what they failed to do for you. These tests aren't random. They're reflections of our true selves. And when it mattered most, they failed. Now they'll carry that failure with them, like a permanent mark, a reminder that when the world needed them to show their strength, they chose to look away. Karma has a way of ensuring they learn this lesson, even if it takes time. Number 5, bullies are mirrors, and bystanders show their reflection. Bullies don't have power in isolation. Their strength doesn't come from within, it's drawn from the audience they gather around them, the ones who stand silently by, pretending they're not involved, convincing themselves they're innocent because they don't take part in the actions. These bystanders, the silent ones, are often the ones that fuel the fire. Without their passive consent, the bully's power would dissipate. But instead of stepping in to help, the bystanders stay silent, unwilling to challenge the status quo. They believe that as long as they don't speak up, they're free of blame. Here's the painful truth: by doing nothing, they are complicit. Inaction isn't neutrality, it's a choice that supports the bully. It's like holding up a mirror to the collective morality of those around them. The crowd is tested. Will someone speak up and say, "This isn't right"? Or will the silence continue, giving the bully the green light they crave, an assurance that no one will stop them? The bystanders might think they're safe, hiding behind the excuse of neutrality, but their silence is far from innocent. Every time they turn away, every time they choose not to act, they give permission for the bully to continue. Their silence is loud. Karma doesn't make distinctions between bullies and bystanders. It sees them as two sides of the same coin. One acts out of aggression, the other out of cowardice, but both contribute to the harm. And when karma comes knocking, the bystanders won't be let off the hook. They'll face their own mirror one day, and maybe in a future moment of their life, they'll find themselves bullied, isolated, and in need of help. When no one steps in, when no one shows up for them, they'll finally understand the weight of their silence. They'll see their reflection every moment they looked away will come back to them. Karma doesn't just punish the bully, it makes sure that the bystanders feel the weight of their complicity. Their silence, after all, is never as innocent as it appears. Eventually they'll realize that their passive acceptance of cruelty was its own form of wrongdoing. And when they find themselves in a place of need, they'll feel that truth in the deepest parts of their soul. Number 6, your resilience becomes their punishment. There is a unique form of karma that requires no confrontation, no revenge, and no bitterness. It's called your resilience. Every time you rise above the pain they ignored, it forces them to confront their own cowardice. As you transform the hurt they turned a blind eye to into strength, the betrayal they allowed into unyielding determination, they will watch in awe and discomfort. It's not just about surviving. It's about how you survived. And what they'll witness is your growth in ways they never expected. They'll see you stand taller, stronger, more confident than ever before. Each step forward you take, each victory you achieve, becomes a silent scream that reminds them of everything they lacked: courage, compassion, integrity. While you flourished in the fire, they remained stagnant, haunted by the choices they failed to make when they had the chance. The power of resilience is that it speaks louder than any words could. It doesn't seek validation or vengeance, it simply is. And for them, it serves as a constant, silent reminder of their failure. They might try to justify their inaction by telling themselves you were strong enough to handle it on your own, that you didn't need anyone's help. But deep down, they know the truth. You didn't need to suffer alone. They could have helped. They could have made a difference. But they chose not to. As you continue to rise, the gap between you and them grows wider. They will be left in the shadow of their own cowardice, grappling with the uncomfortable truth that they had every opportunity to be brave, to stand by you, and they didn't. Your resilience becomes their silent punishment, a never-ending reminder of the courage they lacked when it mattered most. The best part, your strength isn't just for them to witness, it's yours. Their shame may linger in their hearts, but your triumph, your journey will shine brighter than anything they could have imagined. Number 7. They will face their own bullies. This isn't about revenge, it's about balance. Life has a way of ensuring that people walk in the very shoes they once chose to ignore. The pain they brushed off as not their problem will one day come knocking on their door, becoming their own reality, forcing them to confront the very truth they spent so long avoiding. Suffering alone is a burden, and silence cuts deeper than any insult. When their turn arrives, they'll remember you, the times you silently cried for help, the moments you needed someone to speak up, to stand by your side, or simply acknowledge your pain. and in the quiet of their own reckoning, they will see themselves for what they truly were: not innocent bystanders, but complicit in the cruelty. The irony will be undeniable, but it will also be just. They will face their own bullies. Life has a mysterious way of evening out the score. Karma, with its unyielding grip, will not let those who turned a blind eye to your suffering escape the consequences of their neglect. They may not recognize it in the same form. They might find themselves under the thumb of a controlling boss, or stuck in a toxic relationship, or perhaps in a situation that strips them of all power, but their reckoning will arrive. And when it does, they will experience firsthand the sting of isolation, the aching void of allies who never appeared, and the heavy weight of the loneliness that they allowed you to endure. The very silence they chose to ignore your pain will now echo back at them, and in that moment they will finally understand what you went through. They'll hear the whispers of their own excuses, the ones they clung to as they stood by and did nothing for you. "It's not my business, what can I really do?" It's not that bad now. Those words will haunt them, as they desperately search for someone to intervene, to stand up for them, only to be met with the same indifference they once showed you. The same callousness they displayed will greet them in their time of need. Karma doesn't forget, and it certainly doesn't miss its mark, and with no one left to stand beside them, they will experience the same crushing weight of abandonment, the way you were left to endure it all alone. It will be a painful lesson, one that will forever change the way they view the world and the way they treated you, because in the end they will learn that nothing escapes the cosmic balance. The universe ensures that those who fail to acknowledge the pain of others will one day feel the very same pain, in ways they never saw coming. Number 8. They weren't protecting themselves, they were choosing sides. Silence may masquerade as self-preservation, but let's be honest, it's a choice. When they stayed silent, when they turned their eyes away from your suffering, they weren't protecting themselves, they were choosing sides. By refusing to stand with you, they automatically stood with the bullies, even if they were too afraid to admit it. Whether they consciously recognized it or not, their inaction wasn't some neutral act, it was a statement in itself. It signaled to the bully that their behavior was acceptable, and to you that you were alone. People love to comfort themselves with the illusion of neutrality, claiming that they were merely staying out of it, keeping their distance from the conflict. But in reality, neutrality is an illusion in situations of injustice. Every moment they chose to remain silent, to look the other way, they were inadvertently giving power to the bullies and deepening your suffering. They may think they were playing it safe, but the truth is, they were making a choice, and it was the wrong one. Karma doesn't turn a blind eye to that kind of betrayal. Those who stood on the sidelines, pretending that silence was their shield, will eventually realize that avoiding conflict doesn't protect you from consequences. In fact, it often drags you deeper into the very mess you were trying to escape. Those who thought their silence would keep them safe will soon discover that there's no escaping the consequences of choosing the wrong side. When the tables turn, and the people who once stood by and did nothing find themselves in need of help, they'll discover the harsh truth: silence is a weapon. They'll look around, desperate for someone to defend them, for someone to say, "This isn't right," but no one will. And in that moment, they will realize what they couldn't see before: they weren't neutral, they were complicit. They chose comfort over courage, and now they will have to pay the price for that decision. Karma is patient, but it is precise. The people who thought they could avoid the consequences of inaction will find that they cannot hide from what they allowed to happen to you. Number 9. The universe doesn't ignore pain. The universe doesn't forget the pain of the unjustly treated. It doesn't stand idly by while suffering goes unnoticed. It is a law of energy: nothing is truly lost. The suffering you endured, whether it was humiliation, isolation, or betrayal, carried its own energy, its own weight. And while it might have seemed like the world moved on, that pain didn't simply vanish. It lingers, quietly carried through time, finding its way back to those who chose to ignore it, to look the other way, to remain indifferent. Every insult, Every moment of silence from those who could have stepped in, every second you spent in the shadow of their inaction, is like an echo in the vastness of the universe. You may have felt alone in those moments, but the energy of your pain is never forgotten, and the people who chose to disregard it, they cannot escape it. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, makes sure that what was done in the dark doesn't stay there forever. It ensures that everything comes full circle. Karma is the vehicle that carries that energy. It doesn't need to be grandiose or dramatic, it is simply about balance. Those who stood by, pretending they couldn't hear your cries, will eventually face their own reckoning. The pain they dismissed as not their problem will return to them in ways they never expected. Maybe it will come as a moment of betrayal from someone they trust, or maybe they'll find themselves isolated, struggling for help, with no one to turn to. Whatever form it takes, it will be the universe's way of making sure their indifference doesn't go unnoticed. The truth is, energy doesn't just disappear, it is stored, remembered, and one day it always finds its way back to where it belongs. When it does, those who ignored your pain will be forced to face the weight of their indifference, and that, in itself, will be their punishment. Number 10. They convinced themselves that by doing nothing, they'd avoid the consequences. They told themselves that by remaining silent and invisible, they could go about their lives without disrupting the delicate balance of their comfort zones. They believed that ignoring your suffering would allow them to stay out of the spotlight, to evade the discomfort of having to stand up for what's right. But karma has a way of exposing those who try to hide in the shadows. Their time of blending in and avoiding responsibility is coming to an end. What they fail to understand is that silence, in the face of injustice, is not neutrality, it's complicity. Karma doesn't allow those who choose to ignore the cries of the suffering to escape unscathed. Their quiet indifference has been noted, and the universe is not so forgiving. Now, the time has come for them to face the consequences of their actions, or rather, their inaction. The very thing they feared most, being called out, being held accountable for their lack of action, is exactly what's coming for them. They'll find themselves under the same kind of scrutiny they so carefully avoided when you were suffering. The very gaze they turned away from you will now be cast upon them, as others begin to question why they stood by and did nothing. The bullies they ignored and the pain they turned a blind eye to will no longer be the focus. Now, the attention will be on them, and they will be forced to confront the very thing they tried so desperately to avoid, their own cowardice. They wanted to blend in, but now they are exposed. The bystanders who thought their silence would protect them, who believed that pretending they were unaffected by your pain would shield them from any repercussions, are about to learn the hard truth: invisibility is never permanent. It's an illusion, a temporary refuge that collapses when the universe decides to shine a light on their complacency. Karma doesn't let them stay hidden for long. They thought they could remain safe in the shadows, but now the light is on them, and they will have no choice but to face what they've done, or rather, what they failed to do. They weren't innocent, they were just as guilty for not stepping up when it mattered most. And when their time comes, they won't be able to hide anymore. No more silence, no more hiding behind the mask of indifference. The truth will catch up to them, and there will be no escaping it. Number 11. Karma doesn't need to inflict pain upon them in a direct, obvious way. No, its most powerful punishment is far more subtle and infinitely more devastating. Karma doesn't need to make them suffer, it simply allows them to witness the life they could have had, the person they could have been, had they found the courage to step forward and support you. They will watch as you grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate with every step you take, and they'll be left behind, frozen in time, trapped in the same fears and insecurities that kept them from acting when it mattered most. The contrast between who you've become and who they could have been is the greatest punishment of all. It's not the external consequences that will hurt them, it's the internal realization that they chose the path of cowardice, and now they will have to live with the consequences of that choice. Your growth shines a light on their stagnation. As you rise, they remain stuck in the same place they've always been, unwilling or unable to overcome their own hesitations. They may tell themselves they did the right thing by staying out of the conflict, that avoiding it was the safest choice. But deep down, they know the truth. They were afraid. They were afraid to show courage, afraid to stand up for what was right when it was most needed. And now that fear, that cowardice, defines them. It is all they are, all they will ever be. Every time you grow, every new victory, every lesson learned, every new strength gained, it becomes a mirror to their failure. They will look at you and see the version of themselves they could have been had they chosen to act with courage, had they stepped up to support you. But now it's too late. Time waits for no one, and it certainly doesn't wait for those too fearful to act. You are moving forward, evolving, becoming the person they could have been, but they are stuck in the past, frozen by their own doubts and hesitations. And the harshest part, karma doesn't need to punish them with pain or suffering. It lets them watch you thrive, watch you become the person they could have been, had they only chosen to step out of their own fear. That is the true punishment. It's the knowledge that they could have done more, that they could have supported you, but they didn't. It's the haunting realization that they chose comfort over courage, and now they have to live with the knowledge of what they missed out on. Their ignorance will cost them. The universe has a way of making people feel the weight of their choices, especially when it comes to how they treat others. The silence they chose, the refusal to act when you needed help, wasn't just an absence of action, it was a betrayal. And karma, in its infinite wisdom, ensures that this betrayal is not forgotten. When their own moment of need arrives, when they find themselves struggling, desperate for support, they will be left alone. The very isolation they allowed you to endure will now become their reality. No one will be there to help them when they need it most, and they will finally understand the weight of their betrayal. The universe has a way of making sure that those who turn a blind eye to the suffering of others will face the same loneliness they imposed on others. In life, it is not simply the presence of hardship that tests us, but the profound experience of being left alone in the midst of our struggles. When the world becomes cold and indifferent, those who once turned away from us will eventually reach out, hoping for the very help they once refused to offer. But by then they will find no one there to support them, just as they were absent when we needed them the most. In their arrogance, they may have believed they could stand alone, relying on their own strength, or perhaps assumed that the people they left behind would always be there for them. But the truth is that the universe has a way of bringing balance to these injustices, even when it feels like there is no immediate reprisal. As the book of Galatians reminds us, do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, Galatians 6 verse 7. It is in these moments that we come to understand that the consequences of our actions are not always immediate, but they are inevitable. The pain of betrayal often stings the most when we realize that those we trusted, those we once stood by, are no longer there when the tables turn. It is a bitter pill to swallow when we are left to fend for ourselves, abandoned by the very people we thought would be there through thick and thin. Yet, in our suffering, we find an opportunity for growth and a deepening of our faith. As a follower of Christ, we understand that even in these lonely moments, we are not truly alone. Jesus himself spoke of such moments of abandonment when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27 verse 46. These words, spoken from the cross, are a profound reminder that even the Son of God faced the weight of isolation and despair. Yet in that very moment, God's plan was unfolding, and Jesus was fulfilling his divine purpose. His sacrifice showed us that in our darkest hours there is purpose, even when we cannot see it. When others betray us or refuse to stand by us, they may never realize the depth of their actions. But we can take solace in knowing that there is a greater plan at work, one that transcends our understanding of justice. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord in Romans 12 verse 19. This verse reminds us that it is not for us to seek revenge, but to trust in God's perfect timing. The weight of their inaction will one day become clear to those who have failed to show compassion, just as their absence became so painfully clear to us when we needed them the most. As we wait for God to bring about justice, we can find comfort in the knowledge that He is faithful and just. Karma, as some may call it, is not just some cosmic force of retribution. It is the principle of divine justice that reflects the heart of God's law. It is God's way of ensuring that what is sown is also reaped. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. Galatians 6 verse 7. This isn't a punitive system designed to bring misery to others, but rather a natural order that leads to balance. Those who have acted out of indifference or cruelty will, in time, come to understand the consequences of their choices. It is not for us to determine when or how this will unfold, but we are called to trust that God's justice is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. The person who wronged us, the one who stood by as we suffered, will one day find themselves in the same position, facing their own challenges and vulnerabilities. In these moments they will discover what it feels like to be abandoned, to reach out for help and find no one there. It is then that they will understand the weight of their choices, though they may never openly admit it. And while they may attempt to justify their silence or inaction, the truth of their betrayal will remain etched in their hearts. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6 verse 21. In their hearts they will know the truth of what they have done, and it will weigh heavily upon them. But as for us, we do not take pleasure in this. As Christians, we are called to forgive, to love even those who wrong us. Jesus, in His infinite grace, taught us to pray for those who persecute us, to bless those who curse us, and to pray for those who despitefully use us. Matthew 5 verse 44. Our journey is not one of seeking revenge or wishing harm upon others, but one of rising above the pain and growing stronger in our faith. In this process, we come to see that our suffering has not been in vain. Through it, God has molded us into the people we are meant to be, teaching us patience, compassion, and strength. We become more like Christ, who endured suffering and betrayal without seeking retribution. Our strength in the face of betrayal is a testimony to God's work in our lives. While others may remain stuck in their bitterness, trying to justify their actions, we continue to rise above, walking in the confidence that God's plan for us is greater than any betrayal or hardship we could face. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 4 verse 13. This strength is not our own but His, and it is through His power that we are able to stand tall, unshaken by the winds of injustice or the coldness of the world. As we look ahead, we do not need to worry about the struggles of others. They must face the consequences of their choices, but our focus remains on walking faithfully in the path that God has laid out for us. Our journey is one of hope, faith, and unwavering trust in God's timing. As we continue to grow and persevere, we can take heart in knowing that in the end, justice will prevail not through our own efforts, but through the sovereign will of a loving and just God. So let those who wronged us face their own battles. Let them bear the weight of their choices. We will continue to rise, unwavering in our faith, knowing that God is with us, guiding us, and preparing us for a future filled with His promises.